Technician First Class Daniel Cross was not supposed to be in the Grand Hall during the Verith Empire's ascension ceremony. He was maintenance crew, one of the invisible people who kept the station's environmental systems running while diplomats and nobles conducted their important business. But the life support regulator in the Grand Hall had chosen today of all days to malfunction, and Daniel had drawn the short straw to fix it quietly without disrupting the proceedings. So here he was, wedged into a maintenance alcove high in the ornate wall, trying to be as invisible as his station required, while Queen Isavethra herself presided over the formal acceptance of 3 new coalition species into the Verith sphere of influence. The Verith were an ancient and powerful species, elegant beings with distinctive pointed ears that could track sound with predatory precision and skin that shifted through iridescent colors reflecting inner states. Queen Isaveth was legendary even by their standards. Brilliant strategist who'd negotiated peace in 3 sector conflicts, compassionate ruler who'd reformed Verith criminal justice, and according to every piece of media Daniel had ever seen, breathtakingly beautiful in ways that transcended species-specific aesthetics. From his vantage point in the alcove, Daniel had an unobstructed view. The queen stood at the ceremonial platform, her skin luminous silver gold, colors his mandatory cultural briefing said indicated formal authority and serene confidence. Her ears were positioned in perfect regal attention. She spoke with a voice that carried across the hall without effort, each word precisely weighted for diplomatic impact. And she was, objectively, stunningly beautiful. Not just in the physical sense, though her features were striking by any standard, but in the way she commanded the space. Intelligence and compassion evident in how she addressed each species delegation, acknowledging their unique concerns while weaving them into the broader alliance. Grace under pressure of conducting diplomacy before hundreds of witnesses, authority that felt earned rather than assumed. Daniel worked quietly on the regulator, trying not to get distracted by the ceremony. But he kept glancing down at the queen, watching her navigate complex political exchanges with what looked like effortless skill, but he knew must be the result of years of training and experience. He didn't mean to say anything. He was supposed to be invisible, silent, just another piece of station infrastructure. But watching the queen synthesize 3 different species concerns into a unified acceptance speech that honored each while building coalition, he whispered under his breath without thinking, "My God, she's beautiful." It was barely audible, meant for no one, just an involuntary expression of awe at competence combined with physical grace. Except the queen's ears twitched, oriented toward his alcove with the precision of radar dishes locking onto a signal. Her head turned slightly, maintaining her formal posture, but clearly triangulating the source of the sound. And then, slowly, while her advisors continued the ceremonial proceedings around her, Queen Isaveth looked directly at him. Their eyes met across the crowded hall. Her skin flickered with colors Daniel didn't recognize from his briefings, surprise maybe, or curiosity. Her ears tilted forward in what might be interest or might be the prelude to having security remove him. The moment stretched. The ceremony continued around them, but for several heartbeats, there was just the queen of the Verith Empire and a maintenance technician who just accidentally said something he wasn't supposed to while being somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. Then Isaveth returned her attention to the ceremony, but Daniel could swear her skin had shifted to colors that looked almost like amusement. Daniel finished the repair, filed his maintenance report, and spent the rest of the day trying to forget the mortifying moment when the queen of the Verith Empire had looked directly at him after he'd whispered like an idiot. He was just a technician. She was an empress of an interstellar power. Whatever that moment was, it was over and meaningless. Except the next day, Daniel received a summons through official channels. Queen Isaveth requested his presence at a private audience. His supervisor thought there'd been some administrative error. Daniel thought he was about to be formally reprimanded for speaking during a sacred ceremony. When he was escorted to the queen's private receiving room, far less formal than the Grand Hall, but still intimidating with its elegant furnishings and subtle luxury, he found Isaveth alone except for a single guard at the door. Her skin was curious silvers and soft golds rather than the formal colors from yesterday. Her ears were in a relaxed but attentive position. Technician Cross, she said, her voice carrying the same authority as during ceremony but softer somehow, less performed. You spoke during yesterday's ceremony. Do you know that Verith hearing is acute enough that I could distinguish your voice from 47 other beings present in that hall? Daniel's throat went dry. Yes, Your Majesty. I apologize for the disruption. You said I was beautiful. It wasn't a question, but Daniel nodded anyway, his face heating with embarrassment. I did, Your Majesty. I didn't mean to speak aloud. I was just. The words came out. You were not wrong, Isaveth said, and her skin flickered with colors that might be amusement. I am objectively beautiful by Verith standards, carefully bred genetics, centuries of royal lineage selecting for aesthetic traits that inspire loyalty and admiration. My beauty is political tool, diplomatic advantage, genetic inheritance I had no part in creating. Her ears tilted in a position Daniel hadn't seen before. But you didn't say it as political observation or diplomatic flattery. You whispered it like discovery, like genuine surprise. She paused. Why? Daniel struggled to articulate something he hadn't even consciously thought through. Because, watching you navigate that ceremony, the intelligence and compassion in how you handled each species' concerns, the way you made complex diplomacy seem effortless. That was beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with genetics or breeding. The physical beauty was just additional. Isaveth's skin shifted through colors rapidly, surprise, pleasure, something that looked like she'd never heard something framed quite that way before. Explain. Your Majesty, I'm just maintenance crew, I don't have the words. Try anyway. So Daniel tried. He explained watching her balance 3 different species' political needs while maintaining Verith authority. How she'd acknowledged historical conflicts without letting them define future cooperation. How she'd made each delegation feel heard and valued while building something larger than any individual concern. That took intelligence, empathy, strategic thinking, and grace under pressure, Daniel said. All of that together, that's beautiful. The fact that you're also physically stunning by universal standards is almost beside the point. Isaveth was quiet for a long moment, her skin cycling through colors Daniel couldn't interpret. Then she said, Sit down, Technician Cross. I'd like to continue this conversation. What should have been a brief audience became an extended conversation that stretched past the hour Isaveth had scheduled. She asked Daniel about his work, not as empty courtesy, but with genuine curiosity about what it was like to maintain the infrastructure that kept the station functional while important people conducted important business above and around him. Daniel, once he got past his initial terror of saying the wrong thing to alien royalty, found himself actually talking honestly. He explained that most diplomats and nobles didn't even see maintenance crew. They were functionally invisible, keeping critical systems running so others could focus on treaties and alliances. That there was a strange satisfaction in being essential, but unseen, in knowing that the grand ceremonies only happened because people like him ensured the life support didn't fail at inopportune moments. You said I was beautiful while thinking you were unobserved, Isaveth pointed out. Because you exist in spaces where people don't look, where you watch without being watched. Exactly, Daniel said, then realized he was being far too casual. Your Majesty. Isaveth's ears flicked with what Daniel was learning might be amusement. You may call me Isaveth in private conversation. Formality serves important purposes in public, but it becomes exhausting when applied universally. She was quiet for a moment, her skin cycling through thoughtful colors. Do you know what it's like to be constantly observed? To have every word analyzed for political subtext, every expression interpreted for diplomatic meaning, every movement evaluated for what it signals about policy or alliance or personal favor. Daniel shook his head. The opposite, I imagine. I'm trained to be invisible. Yes, Isaveth said, her skin darkening slightly. The opposite exactly, and that's refreshing. You spoke honestly without calculation because you thought no one was listening. You saw me, truly saw me, rather than just calculating how to use my position for advantage or how to avoid offending someone with power over your career. Their conversation ranged from station maintenance protocols to governance philosophy to what it meant to be yourself when the world insisted on seeing you as symbol rather than person. When Daniel finally left, 2 hours after he'd arrived, Isavith requested that he return for another conversation the following week. Over the following months, the private audiences became regular occurrence. Palace staff gossiped about why the queen kept summoning a random maintenance technician. But Isavith didn't explain, and Daniel certainly wasn't going to volunteer information. For Isavith, Daniel represented something rare in her life, someone who saw her as person first and remembered the title second. Someone who spoke honestly without calculating political advantage. Someone who existed outside the careful hierarchies that governed court life and therefore had no reason to perform or manipulate. For Daniel, Isavith was revelation. Brilliant, yes, but also funny in dry ways that surprised him. Deeply thoughtful about the weight of governance and responsibility. Lonely in ways that made sense once he understood that being constantly observed and analyzed was its own form of isolation. The more time he spent with her, the more he realized his initial whispered comment had been incomplete. She was beautiful, but the beauty was inseparable from her intelligence, her compassion, the weight she carried with quiet grace, and the person she was when she could drop the formal mask for an hour. Daniel and Isavith's friendship, because that's what it became, despite the vast difference in their stations, never became romantic. The practical and political barriers were too significant, and neither had illusions about overcoming them. But it became genuine connection built on mutual recognition. She saw him as valuable despite his lack of status, and he saw her as fully human or Verith equivalent despite her immense power. When Isavith announced reforms improving working conditions for station maintenance staff, better pay, proper equipment, formal recognition of their essential role, court analysts were confused about why the queen suddenly cared about infrastructure workers. Daniel knew, because she'd started actually seeing them as people rather than invisible parts of station operations. When Daniel was promoted to Senior Engineering Coordinator, a position with actual authority and resources, his colleagues wondered how a maintenance tech made such a leap. Daniel knew, because Isavith had recognized competence that had been invisible to everyone else because of where it existed in the hierarchy. Their weekly conversations continued even as both their roles evolved. Isavith ruling an empire, navigating complex political waters, making decisions that affected billions. Daniel coordinating essential systems, managing teams, ensuring the infrastructure that everyone else took for granted actually functioned. Years later, when historians studied Isavith's reign, they noted the period when her policies began emphasizing the value of workers previously overlooked. Maintenance staff, environmental technicians, the people who kept civilization running without recognition. They attributed it to evolved governance philosophy. Daniel knew the truth. It started because a queen overheard someone whisper honest admiration and chose to look back instead of ignoring it. When asked about their unusual friendship, Isavith gave her characteristic thoughtful answer. Coordinator Cross saw me